A few days before Rosh Hashanah, I attended a reception at the Houses of Parliament at which Mickey Levy, the Speaker of the Knesset, gave a talk in response to a welcome from Lindsay Hoyle, Speaker of the House of Commons. It was a warm and friendly meeting where politicians and peers gathered in an atmosphere that reminded me of a school reunion, complete with glasses of wine and kosher canopies sculpted into shapes that looked impossible to put in one's mouth. I really thought, said Speaker Mickey Levy in Hebrew, it was interpreted, that you would cancel this visit in the wake of the Queen's death, and he expressed warm gratitude to his hosts for going ahead with the meeting and allowing him to speak at a difficult and sad time for the British nation. There was a keen sense of friendship, trust, and respect engendered at the meeting, and it was gratifying to know that a fair number of individuals had taken time out of their political working day to attend such a gathering. Any kind of bilateral talks, trade, expressions of support and friendship between the UK and Israel are heartwarming, particularly in the last few years, when the Jewish community has too often perceived themselves to be the target of anti-Semitism from certain quarters of the political world. Such conversations between two distinguished individuals, conducted with sincerity and expressions of hope, can only be a good thing. It was therefore with some shock and surprise that many of us heard the President of the Board of Deputies, Mari van der Zyl, announce to the Tory party conference in Birmingham last week that she supported the Prime Minister's promise to consider moving the UK's embassy in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Such a move by the UK would follow the Trump administration's decision to move the US embassy to Jerusalem, which it did on May the 14th, 2018, on the 70th anniversary of Israel's independence, breaking the long-standing agreement of the international community not to base embassies in Jerusalem until a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is reached. The president of the board may have got carried away in the moment by making her announcement without any consultation with the representative deputies on the board. The progressive deputies, and I think you've written to the chair, Harriet, to the president, including the deputies from this congregation who sit on the board, are understandably outraged not to have been consulted, but more seriously understand that it is not in Israel's interest to move the British embassy to Jerusalem in the long term. Some, it is true, might rejoice that Israel's capital, Jerusalem, is at last recognized, and that it is an anomaly for a country to host the embassies outside Jerusalem. But that is to misunderstand the very real dangers that Israel and Palestine face in the long-term future. David Keyes, a member of the Ark Synagogue and founder of an organization which is not officially part of Liberal Judaism, but is called Liberal Jews for Justice in Israel-Palestine, circulated a letter this week to leaders in the liberal Jewish community, urging the leadership of Liberal Judaism to speak out against moving the UK embassy to Jerusalem. And he gave the following reasons. He wrote, "It will contribute further to reducing Palestinians' human rights." And he says, There are 4 adverse consequences to this. Number 1, it will further embolden the hard right in Israel to expand their disrespect for the international community, for international law, and for Palestinian human rights. Secondly, it will send a clear message to the Palestinian people and leadership and the peoples of the Arab Muslim world in general that the UK is not an honest broker and that Britain will ultimately always take an anti-Palestinian position. 3, it will strengthen the influence of those within the Palestinian and pro-Palestinian camps who believe that rational discussion and compromise will never get justice for the Palestinian people. Moving the embassy will therefore be another action that will strengthen extremism and further undermine any chances of compromise and peace. And fourthly, he says, because of these 3 points, moving the embassy will therefore also further weaken the chances of a 2-state solution. The solution, he adds, enshrined in liberal Judaism's affirmations, and that in turn will inevitably further erode Palestinian human rights. And he concludes his letter by saying, as a liberal Jew, believing in liberal Jewish values, he needs reassurance that liberal Judaism is prepared to uphold those values by courageously and publicly speaking out on difficult issues. Professor Avi Shleim, Emeritus Professor of International Relations at Oxford University and author of several books about Israel and the Arab world, says that such a move would be morally indefensible, legally questionable, and politically damaging. Following Liz Truss's announcement to the Conservative Friends of Israel during her campaign and to the United Nations as Prime Minister that she would relocate the embassy to Jerusalem, Professor Shleim explains that the status of Jerusalem is the thorniest issue in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, one of the most bitter, prolonged, and intractable international conflicts of modern times. Since Israel's capture of East Jerusalem, the rest of the West Bank and Gaza Strip in the June 1967 war, these territories have been viewed by the international community as occupied territory. And he writes, while Israel claims the entire city as its eternal undivided capital, Palestinians claim the eastern part as the capital of their hoped-for future state. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem would violate a raft of UN resolutions and amount to an abrupt reversal of British policy since 1967. This policy, part of a broad international consensus, has held that all embassies should stay in Tel Aviv until a comprehensive peace agreement is reached between Israel and the Palestinians, with Jerusalem as the shared capital of 2 states. So it's not for me here to speculate on why political and our communal leaders have instigated this review of UK foreign policy, nor do I particularly want to pursue the route of outlining Britain's responsibility for creating the problem in the first place. It is worth remembering, however, that when the US administration under Trump moved the American embassy to Jerusalem in 2018, the decision was met with outrage and international condemnation. Violence flared up and dozens of Palestinians were killed. If we are true friends of Israel, true and loyal adherence to liberal Judaism and its commitment to a two-state solution, to nationhood and freedom for the Palestinians, we need to protest forcibly against this blow to Palestinian rights. To advocate for Palestinians is not to ignore the right of Israel as a sovereign state, but it is to recognize, however painful that might be for some members of Anglo Jewry, that we do not have sovereignty or power over another people. The occupation is a malignant influence for Israel and Britain, and the Anglo-Jewish leadership in this country would be a better friend to Israel by campaigning for an end to the occupation, for autonomy for Palestinians, and a peaceful settlement in due course. To speak on these matters, as Rabbi Igor did as well last night, is often to provoke the ire of Anglo Jewry. Israel can often be the most seriously divisive issue in families, communities, and in this country. But there is a powerful ethic that governs relations between nations, the avoidance of war and conflict at almost any cost, peaceful settlements of international disputes, cooperation between nations, and as we prayed on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, a common and united humanity. V'ya'asu chulam aguda achat, la'asot ritzonecha, b'levav shalem. Let all become one fellowship, to do your will with a perfect heart. The future remains uncertain. It remains volatile and frightening for both Israelis and Palestinians. But sooner or later, someone will have to grasp the nettle in order to embrace a peaceful and productive settlement between Israel and Palestine. As Moses says in the closing lines of his poem, Ha'azinu, Lu chachmu, yaskilu zot, yavinu la'acharitam. Were they wise, they would think upon this and gain insight into their future. Kein yehi ratzon. May this be God's will, and let us say, Amen.